Episode 9 of Solfawn. They left the Wolverine's smile at first light. The fire in the hearth had burned low to coals, and the smell of last night's ale still lingered in the wood and cloth of the place. Outside, the morning was clear, no mist, no hesitation. The road north lay open and visible, already marked by the passage of early travelers who had risen before them. It was unmistakably a road meant to be used. Wagons creaked along its length. A pair of merchants passed them not long after they set out, their cart piled high with bundled cloth and tied crates, the driver raising a hand in greeting as they approached. Halen returned it immediately. "May the Shaper's blessing be upon you." The merchant blinked once, surprised perhaps at the formality, then nodded with a quick smile. "And on you." They passed. Apple watched them go, head tilting slightly. "You say that to everyone," he observed. "Yes," Halen replied. "Why?" Halen didn't answer immediately. He walked a few more steps, then said, "Because it costs me nothing, and sometimes it gives someone something they didn't know they needed." Apple frowned slightly, considering that. "Does it work?" Halen glanced down at him. Sometimes that seemed to satisfy him, for now. The road held steady beneath their feet, wide enough for 2 wagons to pass comfortably, its surface packed firm by constant use. Unlike the paths they had taken before, this one carried a sense of order, not just in its construction, but in its rhythm. People moved along it with purpose. A farmer with a mule and 2 sacks of grain. A pair of guards traveling south, their armor marked with the same insignia as those in Graymark. A family on foot, children trailing behind, the youngest half asleep and being guided more than walking. Each one received the same greeting from Halen. Each one responded in their own way, some warmly, some distracted, some simply nodding as they continued on. It did not matter. Halen gave it anyway. It was nearly midday when the road began to feel different, not dangerous, but quieter. The steady stream of travelers thinned, leaving longer stretches of silence between encounters. The land on either side shifted from cultivated fields to rougher ground, still managed, but less controlled, the edges beginning to fray. Halen slowed. Not by much, but enough. Sebastian noticed immediately. "You're thinking," he said. Halen exhaled slowly. "I've walked this stretch before." Sebastian glanced ahead, then back at him. "That's supposed to worry me? It should make you listen." That was enough to quiet any further comment. Wynn's attention sharpened. Apple drifted closer, instinctively sensing the change in tone. "There were 3 of them," Halen said, his voice lower now, carrying differently. "A dwarf, a human, a halfling. The names did not come, or were not offered. They were under my watch," Halen continued. "First time out on a road like this. Thought they were ready." A faint, humorless breath escaped him. "They weren't." The wind moved through the tall grass beside the road, bending it in slow, whispering waves. "We were just north of here, not far enough to think anything could go wrong. Still close enough to safety that it felt earned." He stopped walking. The others did the same. "Kobolds." The word sat heavily in the open air. Apple's nose twitched immediately. "They don't fight like others," Halen said. "Not strong, not alone. They don't meet you head on unless they have no choice." His grip tightened slightly on the haft of his mace. "They came from the ground, from the brush, from places that shouldn't have held anything at all. Low, fast, coordinated." Sebastian's jaw set. "And your group?" Halen's gaze fixed somewhere just past the present. "The halfling went down first," he said. "Dragged. Gone before he could even cry out properly." A pause. The dwarf held, tried to, stood where he thought he should stand and paid for it, surrounded, pulled apart piece by piece. Apple swallowed. "And the human?" Wynn asked. Halen didn't look at him. He ran. A longer silence followed that. "I drove them off," Halen said finally. with the rest of the caravan. Fire, steel, noise enough to break them. His voice dropped. But not before they died. No one spoke. The road stretched ahead, unchanged, but it felt different now. Sebastian rolled his shoulders, easing the tension there, though it did not fully leave him. "Well," he said after a moment, forcing a lighter tone, "if any kobolds decide to try their luck with us," he smirked faintly, "they'll be barking up the wrong tree." Wynne groaned immediately. Apple blinked. That was not a good joke. "No," Halen said. "It wasn't." But something shifted. Just enough. They reached Graymark before the sun began to set. It rose out of the land gradually, not as a surprise, but as something that had always been there and simply needed to be approached properly. The road widened slightly as it neared the town, its edges reinforced, the ground more carefully maintained. Low stone markers lined the sides at regular intervals, worn but deliberate. Then came the walls. Not towering, not meant to impress, but solid, practical, built to keep order more than to repel an army. The gates stood open. Guards flanked them, their posture relaxed but their attention sharp. They watched everything. They missed nothing. Apple noticed immediately. "They are looking at us." "Yes," Wynne said. "That's their job. They are very good at it." "Yes." Apple nodded. "I like them." Inside, Graymark felt structured. Not crowded, not chaotic. Every street seemed to lead somewhere specific. Buildings were spaced with intention. The noise of the place was steady but contained, never spilling over into disorder. Sebastian exhaled slowly as they passed fully within. "Finally," he muttered. "Civilization?" Wynne asked. "Civilization," Sebastian confirmed. They took rooms at the Crown and Sheaf. It was not extravagant, but it was clean, well-kept, and, most importantly, reliable. The kind of place where nothing surprising happened unless someone brought it with them. After securing their rooms and shedding the immediate weight of travel, they stepped back out into the streets. The market was still active, not the early chaos of a village square, but a steady, organized flow of trade. Stalls were arranged with purpose. Goods were displayed clearly. Prices, written or spoken, carried consistency. Apple slowed immediately. "This is different." "Yes," Sebastian said. "This is what happens when people agree on how things work." Apple did not look convinced. They approached a stall selling tools first, simple things, but well made. The metal was cleaner, the edges sharper, the construction more precise than what they had seen elsewhere. Sebastian picked up a blade, testing its balance. "Better," he said. "More expensive," Wynne replied, glancing at the price. Sebastian set it back down. "Of course it is." Apple, meanwhile, had found something far more important. Coins. A small tray sat on the edge of a vendor's stall. Different metals, different sizes, different markings. He reached out and picked one up. "This one is hard," he said, tapping it against another. "Yes," the vendor said. "Iron." Apple picked up another. "This one bends." "Gold." Apple frowned deeply. "Why is the soft one worth more?" Sebastian sighed. "Here we go." They stepped aside slightly as Sebastian crouched again, this time with more patience than before. "It's not about hardness," he said. "It should be," Apple insisted. "It isn't. Hard things last longer." "Yes." "Better things last longer." "Yes." "Then why is this one?" He held up the gold coin again. "Worth more than this one." He rattled the iron coin in his other hand. "Because there's less of it," Sebastian said. "And because people decided it is." Apple stared at him. "That is not a good reason." "It's the only one that matters." Apple looked down at the coins again, then back up. "I still do not like this system." "Neither do I," Sebastian said. "But we're using it anyway." Apple considered that. "You should hold the money. I already am. Good. And then He smelled it. Sweet, bright, sharp enough to cut through everything else. He turned immediately. A small stall near the edge of the market held glass jars filled with crystalline shapes, amber, red, pale gold, catching the light in ways that made them seem almost alive. What is that? Sebastian didn't even look this time. Candy. Apple stepped closer. What is candy? The vendor grinned. Sweetness on a stick. Apple reached out slowly. Can I? That'll cost you, the vendor said. Apple froze. Of course it will. Sebastian stepped in, already reaching for the pouch. One, he said. Moments later, Apple held the stick in both hands. He stared at it, then licked it. Everything stopped. His entire body went still, his eyes widening as if something had just been revealed to him that he had not known was possible. Sebastian, yes? This is the greatest thing that has ever existed. I'm glad you... We must buy all of them. Sebastian glanced at the vendor. How many do you have? 2? Sebastian sighed. We'll take both. Apple held one in each hand, carefully, like they might vanish if he did not. This, he said, is civilization. Sebastian laughed. Now you get it. They continued through the market, though the mood had shifted. Not lighter, but grounded. They looked at armor next. Better armor, layered leather reinforced with metal plates, proper chain, even a few pieces of partial plate displayed behind a more guarded stall. Sebastian examined them closely. Testing, weighing, considering how much. The vendor named the price. Sebastian didn't react immediately. Then, we don't have that. No, Wynne said. No, we don't. Halen rested a hand on the edge of one of the pieces, feeling its weight. It would keep you alive, he said. Yes, Sebastian replied. Which is why it costs that much. Apple looked between them. We will get it later. Sebastian glanced down at him. Yes, he said. We will. As the sun began to lower, they made their way back toward the inn. The streets of Graymark softened slightly in the evening light, the sharp edges of order giving way to something more lived in, more human. People moved with less urgency now. Voices rose. Laughter carried. The day's work gave way to the night's relief. Apple walked between them, one sugar crystal half gone, the other held in reserve. I like this place, he said. Wynne glanced down at him. Why? Apple thought about it. Because things make sense here. A pause, even if they should not. Wynne smiled faintly. Yes, he said. That's about right. The crown and sheaf did not rush into noise. It grew into it. When they first entered near dinner time, the room carried a low hum, the sound of a place already in motion but not yet at full stride. Conversations clustered in pockets. A few tables were occupied, their patrons leaning close over mugs and meals, speaking in tones that suggested familiarity rather than performance. The hearth burned steadily, its fire carefully maintained, casting a warm, even light that softened the hard lines of travel from their faces. By the time they were seated, the room had begun to fill. Not suddenly, but inevitably. A door opened, then another, boots tracked in the dust of the road. Laughter followed, then voices layered over one another until the space felt complete, not crowded, but lived in. Sebastian noticed the fire first. Not the flame itself, but the way it was built, evenly stacked, carefully fed, no waste in it, no neglect. Someone here understood the difference between a fire that burned and one that lasted. He approved of that. They took a table near the hearth, close enough to feel the warmth but not so close that it pressed against them. Halen settled easily into his seat, already at rest in a way that suggested he had learned long ago how to recover while he could. Wynne sat opposite, his attention moving quietly through the room, observing without appearing to do so. Apple climbed into his chair rather than sitting in it, turning once in place before settling, his eyes moving constantly, taking in everything at once. The food arrived quickly, and it was, without question, the best they had eaten for more than a year. The meat had been roasted with care, its surface seared just enough to hold the juices within. When Sebastian cut into it, it gave cleanly beneath the blade, releasing a thin line of steam that carried the scent of herbs and fat. The bread cracked when torn, its crust firm without being hard, its interior soft and warm. Even the vegetables, often an afterthought, held their shape and flavor. Sebastian took a bite, chewed slowly, then leaned back slightly in his chair. "This," he said, almost quietly, "is the best meal I've had since I left home." Halen nodded once, already halfway through his own portion. Wynne allowed himself a small smile. Apple, meanwhile, had approached the meal with enthusiasm and very little strategy. He began with the meat, consuming it quickly, more out of curiosity than preference. The bread followed, then the vegetables, each tried, assessed, and silently judged. Then he found the desserts. There were several, arranged simply but with care, small pastries dusted with sugar, baked fruit folded into thin layers of crust, a dish of something soft and pale, its surface lightly glazed. Apple reached for one, then another, then a third. "This," he said without looking up, "is the greatest thing that has ever existed." Sebastian glanced over. "You said that about the sugar crystals." Apple nodded, already chewing. "That was true then," he said. "This is true now." "Careful," a voice said nearby, warm and edged with amusement. "You'll offend the cook if you keep ranking them." They turned. The man standing beside their table was difficult to ignore. His hair was bright orange, not the dull red of rust or clay, but something sharper, almost metallic in the way it caught the firelight. It framed his face in loose waves that refused to be fully tamed. His beard, however, was black, thick, full, and deliberate in its contrast. Apple stood immediately, walked around the table, stopped directly in front of him. "Your head is on fire." The man blinked once, then laughed, a full, easy sound that carried without effort. "I've been told worse," he said. "Nikolaus Branson." Sebastian rose part way, offering his hand. "Sebastian." Nikolaus took it, his grip firm but relaxed, then nodded to the others in turn. Halen, Wynne, Apple did not offer a name. "It is Apple," he said. Nikolaus raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to assume there's a story there." "There are many," Apple replied. "That's usually how it goes." Nikolaus pulled out a chair and sat without ceremony. "Mind if I join you?" "You already have," Sebastian said. Nikolaus grinned. "Good," he said. "Then I chose well." Conversation came easily after that. Nikolaus spoke like a man who had nothing to hide, no reason to pretend otherwise. He carried the details of his life openly, not as boasts, but as facts. Routes, distances, weather, the small calculations that kept a farm from failing. "West of here," he said, gesturing loosely with his mug. "Half a day's travel if you're moving well, less if you're not dragging a wagon behind you." "You bring goods in?" Wynne asked. "Hides mostly, some grain, peppers when the season cooperates, and wine?" Sebastian asked. Nikolaus hesitated. It was subtle. But it was there. "Not from me." Sebastian's attention sharpened slightly. "Who then?" "Connor," Nikolaus said. "Farm further west, better soil, better grapes, supplies most of the taverns here." Sebastian glanced down at his table, at the mugs, at what wasn't there. "I don't see any," Nikolaus exhaled slowly. "No," he said. "You wouldn't. Why? Because it hasn't come in." The shift at the table was immediate, not loud, but undeniable. "How long?" Halen asked. 3 weeks. That was not a delay. That was absence. Apple tilted his head. "Did he die?" Nikolaus looked at him. "I don't know." "That is a problem," Apple said. "Yes," Nikolaus agreed. It is. Wynne set his mug down. If we're speaking of things taken, he said, his voice quieter now, then perhaps it's time I tell you of something that should not have been. Sebastian glanced at him. Now? Wynne met his gaze. A tale needs telling when it needs to be told. Now is the time. Apple leaned forward immediately. Yes, tell us a story. Nikolaus settled back in his chair, interest clear. Well, he said, now I'm staying. Wynne stood. Not abruptly, but with intention, the kind of movement that shifted attention without demanding it. And it worked. Nearby conversation softened, not stopped, just lowered. He stepped into the edge of the firelight where it caught his face and left the rest of him in shadow. When he spoke, it carried differently, measured, intentional, like something practiced not for performance, but for remembrance. There was once an elf, Wynne began, his voice settling into rhythm, who read more than he lived, and lived longer than he meant to. A few heads turned. Not many, but enough. He had a cat, black as a night with no moon, and a tower filled with books he had not yet finished. A faint smile. His name was Jin. The cat was named Shanti. Apple bared his teeth at the cat's name. Samia and cats, be they leopards, lions, or even small bobcats, were mortal enemies to the Samaya clans. Wynne paced slowly as he spoke, each step aligning with the cadence of his words. And like all men who believe themselves clever, he did not know what he was about to lose. A beat. The fire cracked. There was also a girl, which is where all good trouble begins. A few quiet laughs. She lived in a house that smelled of bread and flour, of warmth and hands that worked too long. She was a human. Her name was Lana. Wynne softened slightly on the name. And she laughed. Not like bells, not like songs, but like something real. Another pause. And that was enough. He shifted again, turning slightly, drawing the room in. They met as all such people do. By accident, by argument, by something neither of them understood until it was too late to stop. Jin spoke of stars. Lana spoke of ovens. He explained the movement of the heavens. She told him when the bread would burn, a ripple of laughter. And somehow, against all reason, they decided this was love. Wynne's tone deepened slightly. And it was. Time passed. Not quickly, not slowly, just differently. For Jin, time stretched. For Lana, it moved. And for a while, they pretended those things were the same. Wynne stopped moving, until they weren't. The room had quieted more now, not fully, but enough. She grew older. He did not. He read more. She watched more. And somewhere between the turning of pages and the cooling of bread, they both understood what was coming. Wynne's voice dropped. He tried. Of course he tried. Magic. Prayer. Knowledge pulled from places no one should look. He reached for anything that might hold time still, and found nothing that could. The best he could do was slow it down. He put all of his magic into an amulet for her to wear. It slowed the passage, but time, like love, cannot be easily stopped. A long pause. On her final night, she did not ask him to save her. Wynne looked out across the room. She asked him to remember. Apple had stopped eating. Completely. She gave him 3 promises. To remember that she would always be with him when he needed her, to protect the amulet she placed in his hand, and to live, not survive, live. Wynne closed his eyes briefly. She died before morning. Silence. Real silence now. Jin did not scream. He did not rage. He endured, because that is what his kind does. A shift, subtle, but unmistakable. Until the amulet was stolen. Wynn opened his eyes again. And then he moved. His pacing resumed, slower now, deliberate. He searched, not like a man chasing a thief, but like something older, something patient. Days became weeks, weeks became something else. He followed whispers of magic, threads of memory, echoes of something that should not have been taken. Wynn's voice sharpened. And at the end of that search, he found it, a pause, in the hands of something that wore a man's shape, but was not a man. The fire popped loudly. No one spoke. It smiled at him. Of course it smiled. Creatures like that always do. Wynn's tone turned almost conversational. It told him a story, a prophecy, a riddle dressed as fate. He leaned slightly forward. What is taken by love, it said, may only be reclaimed by the hand of the beast that devours kings. A murmur, confusion, interest. Jin did not understand, not at first. Wynn's voice lowered, but the creature did. He straightened, and when it dropped its disguise, Wynn let the moment hang. It did not become a monster. Another beat. It revealed one. His voice cut clean through the room. A Rakshasa. The word settled like a stone dropped into still water. There was a gasp from some of the patrons. Wynn continued. A lion in the shape of a man, with hands that bent the wrong way, and eyes that saw too much. A few patrons shifted uneasily. It laughed. It always laughed. Wynn's voice softened again. But Jin remembered something else. He tapped his chest lightly. Not the prophecy, not the threat. Her. A pause. And in that moment, he understood. Wynn's voice grew steady. Love had already given him what he needed. The cadence slowed, each word landing heavier. He did not reach for the amulet in fear. He did not beg. He did not hesitate. He stepped forward, and he took it. The silence stretched. The beast struck. Of course it did. A faint smile, and Jin, who had spent his life reading, finally acted. Wynn's voice dropped to a near whisper. And in that moment, the prophecy was fulfilled. A long pause. Not because he was the beast, Wynn looked up, but because he had learned to become one. Silence. Deep, complete. And so he kept his promises. He remembered her. He protected what she gave him. And a breath. He lived. Wynn stepped back and quietly said something in Elvish under his breath. The fire filled the space he left. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Nicholas let out a slow breath. Well, he said quietly, that's not the sort of thing you forget. No, Wynn said. It isn't. Apple leaned forward. What did you say at the end? Wynn glanced at him. I didn't say anything. Yes, you did, Apple said. They didn't hear it, but I did. Wynn hesitated, then said, the candle burns brighter than the star, and the star remembers it forever. Apple frowned. That does not make sense. Wynn smiled faintly. It will someday, my little monkey friend. The moment broke. Slowly, conversation returned, but softer now, more thoughtful. Sebastian picked up his mug again, drank, then set it down. That's it, he said. Tomorrow we're going to find Connor. Nicholas looked at him. You don't even know him. No, Sebastian said, but I know this. He gestured to the empty space on the table. This is unacceptable. Nicholas laughed. You're going to risk your life for wine. Sebastian met his gaze. Yes, if it is good as you all say it is, a beat, and because something's wrong, he added. Halen nodded. It is. Apple raised his hand slightly. Will there be more pie when we are done? Nicholas blinked. Probably. Then we should go, Apple said. they agreed before the night was done. At first light, they would head west, find Connor's farm, and find out why nothing had come back. They left Graymark at first light. The town was already stirring behind them, quietly, efficiently, its rhythms beginning again without ceremony. Smoke rose in thin columns from chimneys. A wagon creaked somewhere in the distance. Voices carried faintly through the morning air, softened by distance and routine. Ahead of them, the road turned west. Not north, not the well-traveled path they had taken the day before. This one felt different. It was still a road of a sort, but it lacked the certainty of the one leading into Graymark. The ground was less even, less maintained. Wagon tracks cut deeper into the dirt, as though the land resisted being shaped and had only partially given in. Halen paused at the edge of it. He looked back once, not at the town itself, but at the idea of it. Then he turned and stepped forward. The others followed. For a time the road behaved. It held its shape. It guided their steps. It suggested, if not safety, then at least familiarity. Fields stretched out to either side, smaller than those near Graymark, less carefully tended. Fences leaned where they should have stood straight. A few outbuildings dotted the land, some in use, others abandoned. They passed no one, not at first. Then a cart, coming toward them, pulled by a single mule, its head low, its pace slow. The man guiding it did not look up until they were nearly upon him, and when he did, his expression flickered briefly. Something like surprise, something like relief, before settling into something neutral. Halen raised a hand. "May the Shaper's blessing be upon you." The man blinked, then nodded quickly. "And on you," he said, though his voice carried distraction more than conviction. He did not slow, did not linger. He passed them, the cart creaking behind him, and did not look back. Apple watched him go. He did not want to talk. "No," Wynne said. "He didn't. Why?" Wynne glanced at Halen. Halen shrugged. They walked on. The land began to change, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. The fields thinned. The soil grew rougher, more stubborn. Grass gave way to patches of exposed earth and stone. The fences that remained leaned further, their posts weathered, their lines broken. The road narrowed. Or perhaps it simply mattered less. Apple slowed. His nose lifted slightly. Then again, "It smells wrong." That stopped them. Wynne crouched, his gaze already moving over the ground. "What do you smell?" Apple frowned. "Wet dog." He inhaled again, slower. "And something sour." Another breath. "And something else." Wynne nodded. "Rot," he said. Apple looked at him. "Yes." Halen's expression hardened. "Kobolds," he said. Sebastian's hand dropped to the hilt of his sword. "Already?" "Not here," Halen said. "But close." They began to see it then. Tracks. At first only a few. Small impressions pressed into softer patches of earth, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Then more. Clusters, patterns, not wandering, moving, purposeful. Wynne studied them carefully. "Too many for a hunting party," he said. Halen nodded, "and too organized." Sebastian glanced ahead. "So we're not looking for a missing farmer." "No," Halen said. "We're looking for what happened to him." They moved faster, not running, but no longer at ease. The road curved slightly, rising just enough to obscure what lay beyond it. The wind shifted, and with it, the smell, stronger now, not just rot, not just animal, something burnt, something lived in, something wrong. Apple stopped again, not crouching this time, not investigating, just stopping. "They are there," he said. No one asked how he knew. They could feel it now. Halen moved to the front, Sebastian beside him. Wynne behind, bow already in hand. Apple gone, not vanished, but no longer where he had been. They crested the rise and saw it. Fence had been broken, no clean lines, no deliberate entry, just collapse as if it had been pressed inward by weight rather than opened. The field beyond it was churned into mud, the ground torn up by too many feet moving too quickly too often. The farmhouse stood at the center, still standing, but not untouched, windows shattered, wood splintered, arrows embedded in the walls like dark thorns. Smoke drifted upward from a place near the roof where something had burned and been beaten back. Movement. Everywhere. Kobolds. Dozens. They swarmed the house in uneven waves, some pressing forward, others circling, others darting in and out of the broken edges of the yard. Their movements were fast, erratic, but not random. They worked together. They waited. They tested. And from inside the house, resistance. A figure at a window. Another at the door. Something thrown. A shout. Still alive, but barely. Sebastian exhaled slowly. There it is. Halen nodded once. Yes. An arrow struck the ground at their feet. They hadn't been as unseen as they thought. Heads turned. Kobolds noticed. Shrieks rose. Sharp, barking cries that cut through the air and carried across the field. The swarm shifted. Some broke off immediately, turning toward them. Sebastian drew his blade. Wynn raised his bow. Halen stepped forward, his grip tightening on his mace. And somewhere in the shifting edge of shadow, Apple moved. Now, Sebastian said, and they ran. They did not reach the fence before the arrows came. The first struck the ground between Halen and Sebastian with a hard splintering crack. The second came a heartbeat later, low, fast, and buried itself in Sebastian's shoulder just above the seam of his armor. The impact spun him half a step. He didn't fall, didn't even stop. He tore the arrow free with a sharp grunt, blood following it in a sudden hot line down his arm. Left! Wynn called. More shapes moved in the brush, low, hunched, fast. Kobolds broke from cover in a loose arc, their bodies snapping forward with unnatural coordination. Slings whirled overhead, cords humming, then snapping forward as stones tore through the air. One struck Wynn across the ribs with a dull, heavy crack that forced the breath from him. He staggered, caught himself, already drawing as his fingers found the string by instinct. He loosed. The arrow took the first kobold clean through the eye, dropping it instantly, its body collapsing mid-stride. Another rose behind it. Another arrow. Another body. But they kept coming. Sebastian didn't wait. He moved into them, always forward. A kobold lunged low, spear thrusting for his midsection. Sebastian twisted just enough to let it glance off the hardened leather at his side, then brought his sword down in a brutal two-handed arc. The blade struck collarbone, split, carried through. The creature came apart beneath the force, its upper body separating from the lower, in a wet, tearing motion that sprayed blood across Sebastian's chest and face. He stepped through it, did not slow. Another came at him from the side, too fast, too close. It slashed. The blade bit shallow across his ribs. Pain flared, sharp, immediate, but he used it, turned into it, drove his shoulder forward, knocking the kobold off balance, then reversed his grip and thrust upward. The sword punched through the soft underside of its jaw, drove up through its skull and out the back of its head in a burst of dark, wet matter. He ripped the blade free, turned, looking for the next. Apple was already gone, not unseen, but too fast to follow. One moment he had been beside them, the next. The shadows shifted, and he was behind the line. 3 kobolds crouched in the brush, their slings already drawn back for another volley. They never saw him. Apple hit the first blow, both daggers flashing in tight, controlled arcs. The blade slid between ribs, angled upward, piercing into the lungs before the creature could even gasp. He moved through the second without breaking stride, spinning as he did, one blade slashing across its throat while the other drove up beneath its arm, cutting deep into the muscle and severing something vital. Blood sprayed across his hands, hot, sticky. He didn't notice. The third turned. Too late. Apple was already on it. He climbed it, feet planting against its chest, his body folding over it as both daggers came down again and again, punching through fur, skin, bone. The kobold shrieked once, a thin, broken sound, before Apple drove a blade into its eye and twisted. The body convulsed beneath him, then stilled. Apple landed behind it, breathing hard, blinking rapidly as if trying to clear something from his vision. 3, he said, though no one had asked. More coming, Wynne shouted. He had shifted positions, stepping back just enough to give himself space. His bow sang as he loosed again and again, each arrow finding a target, each shot deliberate. But there were too many, too fast, and they were learning. Halen stepped forward, his mace ignited, not with simple flame, but with something heavier, something that burned with purpose rather than heat. Light flared along the metal, casting sharp shadows across the churned ground. Come on then, he muttered. A kobold darted in low, blade flashing toward his thigh. Halen swung, missed. The creature slipped past him, impossibly quick, its blade cutting across the back of his calf before it vanished between his legs. Halen stumbled, caught himself, teeth grinding together. Hold still, he growled. The kobold circled him, grinning, its movements erratic, unpredictable. It darted in again. This time, Halen didn't swing, he dropped. One knee slamming into the mud as the kobold lunged, expecting another wide arc. Instead, Halen drove the mace upward. It connected with the creature's torso in a single devastating strike. Bone shattered. The kobold folded around the blow, its ribs collapsing inward as it was lifted off its feet and thrown backward. It hit the ground already dead, its chest caved in, its limbs twitching once before going still. Halen rose slowly. Stay still, he muttered again. A scream cut through the noise. Not kobold, human, from the house. Sebastian heard it, turned, saw the swarm pressing harder now, sensing weakness, sensing opportunity. We're not done, he said. No, Halen replied. We're not. Body flip, Apple shouted. Sebastian didn't question it. He stepped forward, planting his foot, bending his knee just enough. Apple came at him at full speed, small, fast, precise. His feet hit Sebastian's thigh, then his chest, then his shoulder in rapid succession. Sebastian drove upward at the same moment, adding force to the movement. Apple launched, flipped, upside down in the air, both daggers drawn back. He came down behind a kobold mid-charge, driving both blades into its back with enough force that the tips burst through its chest. The creature jerked violently. Apple ripped the blades free, twisting as he landed, already moving again. Sebastian followed. One step, one swing. 3 kobolds died in that single motion, his blade cutting clean through them in a brutal arc that left them in pieces before they even understood what had happened. Wynne lowered his bow, just for a moment. His lips moved, softly, too softly to hear. The air changed again, but this time it moved, a whisper, then another, then many, layered, close, too close. The kobolds froze. Some dropped their weapons, others clutched at their heads, their eyes widening, their bodies trembling as something unseen pressed against them from within. A few screamed, high, piercing. Then they collapsed, dead before they hit the ground. The rest broke. Whatever held them together shattered under the weight of that fear. They turned, ran, trampled each other in their desperation to escape something they could not see. Sebastian did not let them. He moved through them like a blade through cloth, each strike precise, final. Halen followed, his mace rising and falling, each impact crushing bone, ending movement. Apple darted between them, faster than thought, his daggers finding gaps, ending what remained. It ended quickly after that, too quickly. Silence fell, not gradually, all at once. Bodies lay scattered across the field. The smell of blood hung thick in the air, heavy and metallic, mixing with smoke and churned earth. Sebastian stood still, his sword hanging loose in his grip, his chest rising and falling as the adrenaline began to fade. Halen leaned on his mace, the fire along its surface dimming, then fading entirely. Wynne stood apart, his bow lowered, his eyes distant. The door to the farmhouse opened slowly, not in relief, in caution. A man stepped into the threshold first, crossbow raised, not fully aimed, but close enough that fear still held its place. His eyes swept the field, not trusting what he saw, not trusting that it would remain true. Behind him, shapes gathered. A woman about the same age stood just over his shoulder, her posture straight despite exhaustion, her hands steady in a way that spoke of long practice under pressure. Two younger men hovered nearby, each gripping tools turned into weapons. And further back, a younger woman, blonde. Not young in the way of children, but not worn either. Early 20s, perhaps. Her stance was relaxed, but not careless. She leaned slightly against the frame of the doorway, watching everything with a sharp, appraising gaze. She was not afraid, or at least she had decided not to be. Halen stepped forward, hands open, his mace lowered. "It's over," he said. "They're gone." The man didn't answer right away. He looked again and again, counting, confirming. Only when he was satisfied that nothing else moved did he lower the crossbow. "They kept coming," he said, his voice rough from strain. "Didn't matter when, day, night. They just kept coming. We held," Mela added, her tone steadier. "As long as we could," Sebastian nodded. "You held long enough." They moved into the yard carefully. Even now there was no rush to ease. Wind circled the perimeter first, his bow still in hand, his attention fixed on the edges of the land rather than the center of it. Nothing moved, nothing watched, nothing waited. "Clear," he said at last. Only then did the tension begin to loosen. "Connor," Halen said, turning back toward the man. "We were told this was his farm." Gillam's expression changed immediately. Something tightened. "The farm is mine and Mila's. I'm Gillam. As for Connor, well, he's inside," he said. A pause. Alive. Barely. But not likely for long. That was enough. They moved. The inside of the farmhouse smelled of smoke, sweat, and something darker beneath it. Blood. Left too long without tending. Connor lay on a table near the center of the room. At first glance, he did not look like a man who would survive. His clothes had been cut away where they interfered with treatment. His torso was bandaged in strips of cloth that had long since soaked through and dried again in uneven patches of dark red. One arm lay at an unnatural angle, splinted crudely. His breathing came shallow and uneven, each inhale catching as though it might not fully arrive. Mela moved to his side immediately. "He's been like this since yesterday," she said. "Woke once. Didn't make sense when he did." Sebastian stepped closer, his expression tightening. "That's not going to hold." "No," Halen said. "It isn't." Apple was already moving. He reached into his pouch, pulling free one of the small glass vials they each carried. The liquid inside caught the light faintly. "This is for fixing," he said, holding it up. Halen nodded once. "Good." Mela supported Connor's head as Halen carefully uncorked the vial. "Easy," Halen said quietly, though Connor could not hear him. They tipped the potion into his mouth slowly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Connor's body jerked, a sharp involuntary movement that drew a startled breath from Mela. His chest rose more fully this time, the air pulling in with less resistance. The tension in his face shifted, the tightness easing just slightly. Color returned. Not fully, but enough. His eyes fluttered. Opened. "Mela," he rasped. She let out a breath she had been holding for far too long. "I'm here," she said. His gaze moved, unfocused at first, then finding shapes. "People. They're still—" "They're gone," Halen said gently. "You're safe." Connor stared at him for a long moment. Then his eyes closed again, but his breathing had changed, stronger, steadier, alive. Halen did not stop there. He placed a hand lightly over Connor's chest, closing his eyes as he drew in a slow breath. When he spoke, it was not loud, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that did not belong to him alone. Light, soft at first, then steadier, spread from his hand, sinking into Connor's body, knitting what it could, easing what it could not fully mend. The worst of it receded. The rest would take time. "He'll live," Halen said at last. Mela nodded, her composure finally slipping just enough for relief to show through. "That's enough," she said. Not all of it could be undone. They learned that quickly. 2 of the farmhands had not survived. Their bodies had been brought inside before the worst of the siege had begun, laid side by side and covered as best as possible. There was no question of what needed to be done. They buried them before the sun fully set. The ground was harder than it should have been, the work slow and heavy. Gillum dug. Halen joined him without being asked. Sebastian followed, his movements steady, deliberate. Wynne stood watch for a time, then he helped. Apple tried, but then decided to keep an eye out for more kobolds. After the bodies were buried, Gillum spoke first, his voice rough but steady. Mela followed. Halen offered something quieter, something shaped by his faith but not imposed upon the moment. The earth closed over them. The work ended. But the weight remained. The kobolds were not given the same. They were gathered, dragged, piled. The smell grew worse as the bodies were moved, the heat of the day already turning them. Before tossing the bodies of the kobolds onto the pile, they checked to see if there were any coins or other items worth salvaging. Other than a few coppers, there wasn't much. But around the leader's neck, Apple spotted a glimmer. The leader was wearing a necklace. It had a clear gemstone in the middle with a silver pendant. He called Wynne over, who confirmed it was magical. Wynne took the necklace and put it in his pocket, telling Apple they'd examine it closer later on. When they were done, Halen lit the pyre. The fire took quickly. Too quickly. Flames climbed over the pile, consuming fur, cloth, flesh. The sound of it was wrong, wet and sharp and uneven. Smoke rose thick and dark, carrying the smell with it, pushing it outward across the land. Apple watched from a distance. "They smell worse now," he said. "Yes," Sebastian replied. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, night had settled in fully. The air felt different, not lighter, but quieter. Mela insisted they eat, not as a request, as a necessity. "You fought," she said simply. "You eat." And so they did. The meal came together in pieces, bread, stew, what meat remained. It was not what they had eaten in Graymark, but it was honest, and it was shared. Apple tried everything again, more carefully this time. Then the pies came out. He froze. "Heroes get pie," he said, as if confirming something he had already decided. Mela smiled. "Heroes get as much pie as they can eat." Apple nodded. "This is correct." The tension broke, just enough. A fiddle appeared again, though softer this time, played not for celebration but for something closer to remembering. People spoke, quietly, then more easily, life returning. Wynne stood near the edge of it, watching, until "You always stand like that," a voice said beside him. "Or just when you want people to notice." He turned. The blonde woman, closer now, clearer. Her expression held a faint edge of amusement, her posture relaxed but deliberate. "I hadn't realized I was being noticed," Wynne said. "You were," she replied. "I'm deciding whether it's intentional," Wynne considered her. "And?" She shrugged slightly. "Undecided." A faint smile touched his lips. "That seems fair." She studied him for a moment longer. "You're the one who did that," she said. "With the whispers." "I am," she nodded. "Unsettling," she said. "Effective." "That too." A pause. "I'm Ida. Wynne, I heard." She leaned slightly closer. "You always this serious?" "Only when I'm thinking." "And now?" He met her gaze. "I'm thinking," she smiled. "Try not to take too long." Across the room, Apple watched them. "She is human," he said to Sebastian. "Yes." "She is talking to Wynne." "Yes." Apple frowned. "Wynne does not like humans." Sebastian took a drink. "Wynne doesn't like what some humans have done." Apple thought about that, then stood, walked over, stopped beside Wynne. "Why are you talking to her?" he asked. Ida laughed. Wynne exhaled slowly. "Because she is talking to me." "That is not an answer." "No," Wynne agreed. "It isn't." He looked down at Apple. "Not all humans are the same." Apple nodded slowly. That is like orcs. Ida raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure I like where this is going. Unk is not like other orcs, Apple said. Wynn's expression softened. No, he said. He isn't. Apple leaned back slightly. The more I learn, he said, the less things make sense. Wynn smiled. That means you're growing up, Apple frowned immediately. I do not like that, Ida smirked. No one does, she said. Apple shook his head and returned to the table with Sebastian and Halen. Some things, he decided to himself, were just too confusing. This is the end of episode 9 of Solfawn.